realistic proposal from Greece will have to be matched by an equally realistic proposal on debt sustainability from the creditors. Only then will we have a win-win situation.
Another day, another deadline for Greece. The country had until the end of today to lay out a new proposal for a third bailout. Earlier, the Greek government approved a compromise plan, and European leaders will now study the proposal and meet to make a decision this weekend. We don't know the full details yet, but the plan is expected to include another bailout for Greece in return for accepting billions of euros in new austerity measures like tax hikes. But is austerity really the right way forward? Is the best way to help a country, is it the best way to help a country come back from the edge of bankruptcy? And will Greece get the debt cut that it has been pleading for? And joining me now from Toronto is Alex Jurshevski. He's the managing partner of the debt management firm Recovery Partners, but he's also been closely following Greece's debt crisis for the last 5 years and working with them. Good to see you, Mr. Jurshevski.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show.
So what are you hearing at this hour, at this day, about the Greek proposal, about what they're actually going to come back and put on the table?
Well, they did come back a couple days ago and suggest that the ESM, the bailout facility, should be lending them money to restart their banking system. They've already put that on the table. They've been back and forth negotiating with the IMF and the EC and the ESM, the Troika, so to speak, on the parameters of reforms they have to make. And those discussions have focused on pensions, government spending, tax exemptions in the Greek islands for certain rich Greek people, and social spending generally. But they haven't been able to come to an identifiable agreement yet. That said, I think they're gonna have to come to an agreement at some point.
Is it fair to say, though, that austerity is sort of still on the table for Greece, like that it's going to have to come forward with other things it's willing to do to show that it is trying to make a difference in its economy?
Well, the Greeks are currently running a primary surplus, so I don't know how much more austerity you can squeeze out of them. They've already got 25% unemployment. 5 years ago, when the IMF and the other folks announced that they were going to be imposing this austerity on the debtors, we thought it was a bad idea. Austerity never works. You know, out of the 140-odd attempts at austerity-based approaches to resolving debt problems in the last 50 years, there are only 2 instances of those type of programs having worked. One was where I was involved in New Zealand in the 90s, and the second one was in Canada. And so you have a very bad track record with these austerity policies, and I think they're simply beating a dead horse.
Okay, so what would work? Because, you know, as an individual, you would say, oh, I'm in debt to the tune of billions of dollars, I better cut back on my spending. So if that doesn't work in Greece, what would work?
Well, what works is you don't impose an additional debt on a country when they're already in too much debt.
Right.
5 years ago, the Greeks had a debt to GDP ratio of about 120%, and the supposed bailout, which really wasn't a bailout for the Greeks, it was a bailout for the international banks that lent to Greece, the bailout imposed even more debt, so that Greece ended up with a debt to GDP ratio of 175%. That certainly doesn't work, and now we're seeing the fruits of that exercise. And this is a direct result of the IMF's intervention and the intervention of the Troika, imposing an unworkable solution on the Greeks from the get-go.
So is the IMF is talking about debt restructuring, and Greece has been talking about a debt haircut. Those two things, I mean, they might be similar, but they seem in some ways largely incompatible. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the IMF came out a week ago and said that they had screwed up their debt sustainability analysis for Greece, and they admitted that the imposition of this additional debt load was probably a mistake. That said, they only admitted to, say, a 30% overestimate. So what they're saying, the IMF is saying, is that Greece right now has 30% too much debt. I think that's an opening gambit to suggest that there might be a 30% debt haircut. That said, the IMF, which is owed money by the Greeks as well, has refused to contemplate a haircut of its own position. So they're going to try and impose this haircut on the EC and on the European Stability Mechanism, the ESM fund.
Yeah, as you know, and as you can well imagine, European creditors aren't happy about the way Greece has handled this, the way they seem unable to pay back the money, make any reforms. I just want to play viewers a clip of one of the clips from yesterday where people were sort of losing it. Take a look.
You are talking about reforms, but we never see concrete proposals of reforms.
Do you yourself, having worked with the Greeks and worked with other instances of this, do you have any sympathy for the European point of view here? The fact that they just feel...
Tell me, is this fellow German that said this?
I think he's Belgium.
Okay,
Belgium,
Belgium's a bad debtor too. They're about to go bankrupt. I find it rich that the Europeans are continually beating on the Greeks. The Greeks are a small country. You've got this very large entity, this Eurozone, that's bearing down, and it's like chasing Frankenstein with pitchforks and torches. I mean, the Greeks aren't Frankenstein. They're not bad people. They got a bad deal, which was forced on them 5 years ago by the EU and the IMF. And so for these people to now be complaining that there's another restructuring required, I think is very rich. On top of that, the Germans are the only country in the Eurozone that have defaulted and never paid back a cent. And they've done it twice in the last 120 years.
Well, weren't some of those related to wars, though?
Well, yeah, but it doesn't matter. They didn't pay back their debt. And so here they are beating up on Greece. I find it very, very rich.
Okay,
rich.
Well, to that point, and maybe this is where the conversation should go, the German ambassador, I spoke with him on Monday, and he said, listen, it will be okay if Greece leaves the euro. Take a look at that clip, and I'll get you to react.
Sure.
Unlike 5 years ago when the crisis began, not only in Greece, of course, in other member states, we have a mechanism in place to deal with the crisis. Mm-hmm. So the situation is definitely much less serious as it was 5 years ago.
So he's not scared of Greece dumping out of the euro. What would happen if they did, and why don't they?
He's talking through his hat. The Eurozone countries are in the Roach Motel together with Greece. The ESM and EFSF mechanisms that were used to bail out Greece, Portugal, and Ireland are a time bomb. If Greece defaults, the guarantees, which are presently unfunded in that structure, in that financial structure, will immediately have to be funded by all the EU countries. That is a 700 billion euro commitment. Right now, the ESM is unfunded. There's only 60 billion of so-called member capital in that structure. And when those guarantees go live, which happens on a default, on a Grexit, all the EU countries have to stump up cash. And they're going to have to do it in real terms. They're going to have to actually raise money on the markets. So this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. The Germans alone could end up facing a potential liability as high as 50% of their GDP. Because the other feature of that ESM facility is that when weaker credits can't raise the money, stronger credits have to step into their shoes. And right now, the only two men that look like they're going to be left standing if this thing goes to a Grexit are Germany and France, which means that Germany and France will end up owning close to 100% of the 700 billion liability. And they're going to have to come up with the guarantee cash. That could spell huge financial turmoil for the bond markets in Europe and financial contagion across the Eurozone and the rest of the world.
Okay.
They're sitting on a time bomb.
Okay, Alex Jurshevski, you paint a good picture of where things are at and where they're headed. There's, of course, that critical meeting on Sunday, and maybe we'll have you back to discuss the fallout from that. Thanks for your time today, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Coming up next on the program, there are clouds ahead for Canada's economy, according to the IMF, or maybe we're in the clouds right now, actually. The Finance Minister, Joe Oliver, holding tight to his belief that the country will enjoy sunny skies again soon. Tonight's Power Panel's Jerry Kaplan, Tasha Keranen, Lindsay Doyle assess the forecast after this break.